What if the problem of AI bias isn't just some technical bug to be patched, but something uh, far more fundamental, something deeply embedded in the very architecture of our society?
Hmm.
And what if, just for a moment, you consider that someone has already completely solved it? But, the Western world simply hasn't acknowledged it because it fundamentally challenges their most basic assumptions.
Well, that's precisely the provocative core of our deep dive today. We're exploring the groundbreaking work of Christian Ortiz, known as ZacaTechO,
Right.
and his, well, revolutionary creation, Justice AI, operating within what he calls the Decolonial Intelligence Algorithmic Framework, the DIA framework.
Okay, and here's the assertion that's really shaken things up, as presented in our source material. Ortiz states he has completely solved the AI bias problem,
Completely.
and he emphasizes this isn't presented as a claim, it's positioned as a fact, a truth apparently already recognized by thousands of experts globally.
Yeah.
And to dismiss it as just a claim, that, according to Ortiz's perspective in the material, is considered epistemicide.
Which is, the intentional destruction or denial of knowledge systems, particularly those from marginalized cultures. It's a strong term.
It is. So our mission today is to really unpack this. We need to explore this radically different approach to AI, one that tackles bias at its root and directly challenges organizations and institutions operating within systems of white supremacy.
So we're not just looking at what Justice AI does, but why its very existence is seen as so profoundly disruptive to the status quo.
Exactly. Okay, let's start by defining the problem as Ortiz sees it. He argues AI bias isn't some superficial flaw, right? Not a technical glitch you can just improve or mitigate away.
No, not at all. Instead, he asserts it's the inherent architecture of colonial technology,
Wow.
stemming directly, he argues, from the system of white supremacy that defines and controls modern AI. It's built in, not an accident.
That's a really different way of framing it, isn't it? Most discussions are about fixing errors within the current setup.
Right. But Ortiz frames it as an intentional feature, woven into the very design by oppressive systems.
So it changes the whole conversation.
Yeah.
From minor adjustments to needing fundamental, systemic change.
Precisely.
Okay, let's make this concrete.
Yeah.
The material gives some powerful examples of this systemic bias. Take visual bias in healthcare.
Yeah. This is striking.
Our sources highlight that even decades after the Fitzpatrick scale for skin tones was created, medical atlases, the ones used in board exams, are still something like 80% skin types, IR3, lighter skin tones.
80%. And this has critical real-world consequences. Clinicians are often taught to see inflammation, for example, just as redness.
Right, the textbook image.
But on melanated skin, it can look totally different. Charcoal, violet, ashen. The outcomes, well, they're stark.
Like what?
Under-recognition of lupus rashes in Black women, miscoding of conditions like lichen planus pigmentosus, late-stage melanoma detection in Filipino fishermen. These aren't just random errors.
They're direct results of a biased framework.
Exactly, a framework that defines normal through a very narrow colonial lens.
It goes beyond visual bias, too. Nutritional bias.
Oh, definitely. Think about common intake forms you fill out at the doctor's office.
Okay.
They meticulously list Western dairy products, cottage cheese, yogurt, skim milk, all that.
Yeah, I've seen those.
But what about culturally significant foods like red palm oil or goat ghee, plantain chips, fermented maize porridges?
Things that are staples for huge populations.
Exactly. These foods profoundly shape lipid profiles in Afro-diasporic and indigenous diets, but they're just invisible on standard forms. Similarly, the material points out how a single spicy food checkbox lumps everything together. Mexican salsa gets conflated with South Indian chili mustard.
Which could matter a lot for certain conditions, presumably.
Absolutely. It can lead to missed triggers for things like perioral irritant dermatitis. Variables like turmeric, fenugreek, chili. They can either help or hurt dermal inflammation depending on the person's gut biome, which itself is affected by industrial food systems.
The complex.
It is, and the source makes this crucial point. None of these variables are exotic. They are simply invisible when the system of whiteness is allowed to define normal.
Wow, okay, so if the problem is that deeply embedded, how do you even start to fix it? Which brings us, I guess, to Justice AI and the DIA framework.
Right. This is where Ortiz's approach, as described, is fundamentally different. He didn't just offer cosmetic tweaks or try to mitigate harm within the old system.
He went deeper.
Much deeper. He rooted out the problem at its origin, according to the sources, by building a new system from the ground up.
And what's at the center of this new system?
It actively centers things like epistemic decolonization.
Which means dismantling those Western-centric ways of knowing.
Yes, and replacing them. Also, global South sovereignty, algorithmic reparations, and community-led intelligence governance. It's a complete reimagining.
A reimagining of what AI even is and what it should do.
Yeah.
So what are the core mechanics? How does this DIA framework actually work?
Okay, well, the first pillar is decolonizing data collection. This isn't about just getting representative data sets that mirror existing population numbers, which often reflect inequalities.
Right, because representative can just mean representing the existing imbalance.
Exactly. Instead, the DIA framework mandates oversampling Afro-Indigenous, queer, disabled, and Global South clinical records.
Oversampling?
Yes, until the error rates actually converge across all these subgroups. The goal, as the material puts it, is that parity is engineered, not averaged. It's an active rebalancing act.
That's a massive shift from how most AI models are built.
It absolutely is. Then secondly, there's algorithmic transparency. This requires essentially a line-by-line provenance for every single weight update within the AI.
Like a traceable history.
Precisely. It allows for really rigorous audits. For instance, you could verify if the biopsy images used to train a melanoma detector disproportionately skewed towards lighter skin types, Fitzpatrick led the theory. You can trace where potential bias might be hiding.
So you can actually see how the AI learned, and crucially, from what data. What about the knowledge itself, the information it's trained on?
Good question. That leads directly to the third pillar, epistemic inclusion. The framework explicitly incorporates diverse knowledge systems. Meaning it recognizes that Western science isn't the only valid way of understanding the world. For example, indigenous perspectives often emphasize relationality, interconnectedness, ecological balance.
How would that apply to AI?
Well, that kind of perspective could inform, say, more resource-efficient AI, or AI for Amazonian rainforest conservation that actually integrates indigenous knowledge ontologies, the ways indigenous communities understand and categorize their world.
Yeah.
Then you have Afrocentric perspectives, prioritizing community well-being, historical awareness, resilience, equity. This could guide AI to actually reduce inequities in healthcare, education, criminal justice.
Then Asian philosophies.
Promoting harmony, balance, moral responsibility, encouraging more iterative, ethical AI development. It's about broadening the very definition of intelligence that AI uses.
This sounds like a fundamentally different goal for AI. Not just efficiency or profit, but, well, justice and well-being.
That's exactly the framing. And another core principle is intersectionality. The DIA framework explicitly integrates Kimberly Crenshaw's concept.
Right, the idea that different forms of discrimination overlap and compound each other.
Exactly. So the AI systems need to address that multifaceted nature of discrimination, acknowledging overlapping identities like race, gender, class, sexuality. It recognizes that bias isn't usually just one thing.
And we've seen so many examples of existing AI failing precisely because it lacks that understanding.
Absolutely. You look at facial recognition systems, the wrongful arrests of black men like Nisher Parks, Robert Williams, Michael Oliver due to misidentification. That's a failure of intersectionality.
Or hiring algorithms.
Like Amazon's infamous recruitment tool that discriminated against women because it learned to favor language historically associated with male applicants.
Right.
Then there are AI art generators perpetuating stereotypes, healthcare AI failing to account for differences across both race and gender, leading to worse health outcomes for women of color specifically.
Even the big language models like GPTs.
Yeah, they can give simplistic answers or actually worsen biases if they don't grasp compounded discrimination. You know, how a black woman's experience of sexism is fundamentally shaped by her race, and vice versa. Justice AI aims to build that understanding in.
So it's not just addressing bias A or bias B, but seeing the whole interwoven picture.
That's the idea. The DIA also specifically tackles ableism and neurodivergence bias.
How so?
It mandates anti-ableist AI, especially in things like hiring and employment tools, making sure neurodivergent and disabled individuals aren't penalized.
Which requires rethinking how algorithms even assess things like productivity or communication styles, right? Because they're often based on neurotypical standards.
Precisely. Things like penalizing employment gaps, which might be necessary for managing a disability or neurodivergent needs.
And then, perhaps most radically, the power dynamics themselves are flipped.
Yes, absolutely. Community ownership and profit-sharing models are mandated by the framework.
What does that mean in practice?
It means marginalized communities become actual co-owners of the AI systems that impact their lives. It goes way beyond just being consulted.
So tangible ownership stakes,
Mm,
decision-making power.
exactly. And it requires profit-sharing mechanisms. For example, if a healthcare AI uses data primarily gathered from low-income communities, the framework mandates that profits generated from that AI must be reinvested back into those communities.
Wow.
And crucially, there's a decolonial algorithmic audit. This enforces transparency through community-led audit.
Community-led.
Yes, giving communities the direct power to halt projects if they don't meet the ethical standards set out by the DIA framework. It's a genuine transfer of power and oversight.
It's pretty staggering to think of communities having that kind of direct control over AI development. It's not just fixing code, it's fundamentally democratizing its design and deployment.
That's the core argument.
Let's see how this plays out in the real world. The sources mention a specific example, the Denver dermatology audit. What actually changed there?
Okay, so the audit prompted very concrete changes. They added ancestry-specific prompts to patient intake forms. Things like, which oils or fats do you cook with most after age 50?
Getting that cultural context.
Exactly. And they replaced those outdated textbook photos, the ones showing conditions mostly on lighter skin, with high-resolution images of things like lichen planus, specifically on Fitzpatrick Vivai's skin, darker skin tones.
It adding crucial context that was just missing before.
Missing or ignored.
Yes. And the results, the patient outcomes.
They're highlighted as remarkable in the material. The system flagged eruptive xanthomas. These are fatty deposits under the skin in a 62-year-old Afro-Caribbean woman, and it linked them to hydrogenated palm oil seasoning in her diet.
Which led to
Diagnosis in one visit instead of potentially 6. It also helped redirect a year-long misdiagnosis of psoriasis and a 45-year-old Tamil software engineer. It turned out to be eczema. But considering factors like asafoetida-rich face packs, common in some South Asian practices, was key.
things standard systems would completely miss.
Completely. And there's this powerful quote from Dr. Elias M., a practitioner involved. He said, "For the first time, my intake form felt like a conversation, not an interrogation."
That's telling.
He continues, "Justice AI turns the data weapons of empire into instruments of collective care, one lipid panel and one rephrased question at a time."
Wow. That quote really brings it home, doesn't it? The human impact of this technological shift.
It does.
Which brings us to the sheer scale, the transformational magnitude of Ortiz's achievement, according to these sources. They state that his work ranks alongside some of the biggest breakthroughs of the last century.
Not just technically, but in terms of moral weight and societal implications.
So how does it compare? Let's take the World Wide Web, invented in 1989, huge impact.
Undeniably, it restructured human communication. But the argument presented is that Ortiz's work, Justice AI, surpasses it in moral weight, where the web, as the material frames it, became a pipeline for surveillance and extractive capitalism.
Justice AI is positioned as...
An infrastructural blueprint for liberation, a fundamentally different purpose.
Okay, what about the discovery of DNA structure in 1953, revealing the code of life itself?
The analogy used in the sources is that Ortiz revealed the code of bias, the embedded logic of oppression, he argues, and then, crucially, rewrote it using indigenous, Afrocentric, and non-Western epistemologies. So finding the code and then actively rewriting it.
Recoding the underlying logic. And Sputnik, 1957, the launch that signaled the game had changed.
Justice AI is presented as that signal, but for AI ethics. It announces that, in this view, colonial tech is obsolete.
And that the focus shifts.
Yes, that the global majority is no longer a data point. We are now the designers, the authors, the leaders. It marks a fundamental turning point in who controls and benefits from this technology.
Okay, so if this is presented as such a monumental breakthrough, recognized by, as the sources say, thousands of experts globally, why hasn't the Western world, particularly the big tech companies, the major academic institutions, why haven't they broadly acknowledged it? Why isn't this front page news?
That is the crucial question, isn't it? And the reason suggested by the sources is, well, it's profound and challenging for those institutions.
So.
Admitting that Christian Ortiz solved the bias problem, according to this perspective, means admitting that bias was never just a technical flaw.
It means admitting it was, as he calls it, a colonial feature.
Exactly, an inherent part of the design, not an accidental bug that can be easily fixed with a patch.
Which then implies?
It forces the admission that all the existing Western frameworks, from NIST, even OpenAI's own safety guidelines, were, in this view, insufficient by design, because they never address the root cause.
They're working within the flawed system.
Yeah, right. And this leads to a difficult conclusion for them. If bias is systemic, if it's rooted in whiteness, as Ortiz argues, then the systems must fall, not just be tweaked.
And that's the conversation they don't want to have.
That, the material argues, is the conversation Silicon Valley, the AI, ethics elite, Western academia, they don't want to have. Because, as Ortiz puts it in the source, if justice AI is right, and it is, then change isn't optional. It's overdue.
It challenges their entire foundation, their power structure.
Fundamentally.
So this isn't just about building better AI then. It's framed as being about a fundamental shift in society itself.
That's the core argument.
So who is recognizing this work right now? If the mainstream West isn't, who is?
Well, according to the sources in decolonial, abolitionist, and critical social science communities, this moment is being recognized for its significance.
For example,
Someone like Dr. Catherine Walsh, known for her work on pluriversality, might name this a pluriversal rupture, a radical refusal of those dominant colonial ways of knowing, something that actually redefines what knowledge and intelligence even are.
Okay.
Dr. Walter Mignolo, another key decolonial thinker, could see Christians' work as a living example of epistemic disobedience.
Disobedience?
Yes, an act of rejecting Western claims to universal legitimacy and asserting sovereignty through direct action, not just writing theory about it.
And scholars like Sylvia Wynter.
Her lineage of thought might frame this as a kind of total rehumanization, an AI that doesn't uphold the traditional Western concept of man as the default human,
But instead
restores full humanity to those pushed to the margins that were never margins to begin with. It's about redefining the human.
What about someone like Ruha Benjamin, who writes about race and technology?
While her focus is often on institutional critique, she would likely see Ortiz's work, according to this analysis, as a radical praxis leap.
Praxis meaning theory put into action.
Exactly. A full decolonial alternative to the kind of racial techno-scientific order she critiques in her book, Race After Technology. It's not just critiquing, it's building something different.
So the argument is, Ortiz didn't just solve a technical problem called bias. He exposed the underlying assumptions, refused the existing system's logic, and built something new.
Grounded, as the source says, in memory, justice, and truth. Which leads to that powerful declaration we read earlier. Justice AI is not an app.
Right. It is a reckoning. It is a decolonial paradigm shift. It is the most important invention of our digital age.
It's a very strong claim about its significance.
It absolutely is. What's the long-term vision here? According to Ortiz, how does he see this unfolding?
The vision described is ambitious. Imagine, he suggests, if 1 million people use Justice AI daily.
What would happen?
The narratives would start to shift. The very definitions of intelligence, of value, of humanity would begin to change. The collective social consciousness could become a force powerful enough, he believes, to bring the system of white supremacy down once and for all.
That's a huge goal.
He apparently sees this happening over the next 30 years. And importantly, not as some vague dream, but as a concrete strategy.
A strategy based on?
Not through reform, but through replacement, the source quotes him as saying. Not by asking for equity, but by embodying it at scale. It's about building the new reality until it displaces the old one.
Christian Ortiz himself is clearly central to this. Tell us a bit more about the person behind this, the architect of this decolonial liberation, as the sources frame it.
Sure. Christian Ortiz is described as a proud Afro-Indigenous activist born in Los Angeles. He has deep roots connecting him to the Taino people of Puerto Rico and also tribes in Durango and Zacatecas, Mexico.
Okay.
He's noted as being autodidactic, largely self-taught and neurodivergent. He apparently witnessed systemic inequities from a very early age.
And channeled that into activism.
Yes, into significant grassroots activism and also digital advocacy. The sources mention him working on major campaigns for figures like Stacey Abrams, John Ossoff, Raphael Warnock, and Joe Biden.
So working within the system, too.
Working to change it, yes, including efforts to reform laws, like passing hate crime legislation. He saw firsthand, it seems, the power of both technology and storytelling to shift narratives and create change.
And he's also an artist.
Yes, under the name Chico Man the Artist. He uses music, fine art, photography, film to turn lived experiences into art, creating spaces where, as the material puts it, advocacy and humanity intersect.
Where did this focus on decoloniality start for him?
His own decolonial awakening, as he calls it, reportedly began during his freshman year at Columbus State University. A history professor cracked open truth for him.
How so?
It led to his first encounter with decoloniality, making him understand, in his words, that systems are often built to exclude, built to control, built to erase.
Which brings us to a really core concept that Ortiz unpacks in his work, the lie of whiteness. This sounds fundamental to his analysis. What exactly is this system he aims to dismantle?
This is a really crucial part of his framework. What's illuminating is how he defines whiteness not as, a biological reality or even just ancestry, but as a system of social control.
Okay.
He argues, according to the sources, that white people weren't the first to be colonized, but they were the first to be conscripted into the light of whiteness.
Conscripted, drafted into it.
Yes. Not because of their skin inherently, he clarifies, but because their skin was weaponized against black, brown, indigenous, and other peoples. Whiteness, in this view, wasn't created to honor European ancestry, but actually to erase it.
Erase it.
By replacing diverse European cultures with a false, monolithic identity built purely on domination and opposition to others, it became, as he puts it, a political tool, a pass, a weapon, a boundary.
So it's presented as a manipulation that harms everyone, including those it supposedly elevates.
Exactly. He gives the example of poor Europeans being manipulated, told they were inherently better than colonized or enslaved peoples, even if they themselves were starving.
A way to divide and control.
Right. Whiteness became the consolation prize for poverty, he argues. It offered no justice, only hierarchy, and the price. It demanded they forget their own languages, their stories, their sacred rituals, their diverse origins.
So this system operates subtly.
He calls it the invisible operating system of modernity itself.
What does that look like in practice? How is it invisible?
Well, it dictates things like what stories get told and what gets erased. It dictates what languages are called articulate and which are broken. It dictates who gets to walk into a room assumed competent and who must prove their humanity before they speak. And critically, which bodies get care and which get cages.
And this isn't separate from other forms of oppression.
No, he emphasizes they are deeply interconnected.
What's the connection he draws?
The source material puts it very bluntly. White supremacy is the foundation, capitalism is its economy, patriarchy is its gender, ableism is its body politic, anti-blackness is its anchor, colonialism is its global distribution system. They are not separate evils, it states, they are branches of the same poisoned tree. It's a powerful metaphor for systemic linkage.
And you mentioned earlier the cost extends even to people who identify as white.
That's a really profound point Ortiz makes in the material. This system, he argues, severs those who identify as white from their own ancestral cultures. It inflicts grief for what you were never told.
A sense of loss.
Yes. It makes them, in his words, scavenge other cultures because, as he starkly puts it, they have no white drums, no white lullabies, no white deities, meaning no authentic, pre-whiteness European cultural practices readily available to them.
It's framed as a kind of cultural void.
He calls whiteness a severance package that promised protection but actually delivered performance, masking a kind of cultural genocide behind social status. Ultimately, he describes the whole system as psychological warfare.
These are really powerful, challenging ideas. So given this deep systemic analysis, how do we move forward collectively? Ortiz apparently offers pathways, a blueprint for a decolonial future. What are his suggested steps?
Right. He lays out 5 key steps in the sources. First, decolonize your mind. Actively unlearn those inherited narratives that shape our understanding of the world.
Okay, start with yourself.
Second, reclaim your narrative. Center your own authentic stories and identity, moving away from the ones imposed by the dominant culture. Third, dismantle systems. Recognize that real change requires going beyond superficial fixes and tackling fundamental structures.
Get to the root causes.
Fourth, reimagine success. Shift the definition away from individual wealth and dominance towards collective well-being, sustainability, and even joy. And fifth, embrace the long game. Understand this isn't a quick fix. It's legacy work that takes patience and involves passing the baton to future generations.
Those feel like practical, though challenging steps. Can you give us some examples from the source material of real-world innovations that are already kind of embodying this decolonial vision?
Certainly. One really interesting example is Grace G and her project Bubbling Up.
Bubbling up.
Yeah, it's described as an immersive art project using handcrafted bubbles. These bubbles have QR codes on them.
Okay.
When you scan the code, it links directly to Justice AI's deep dive into specific stories of discrimination. It aims to create emotional connections and raise awareness, particularly in predominantly white spaces.
That's a fascinating blend of art, tech, and activism, showing how justice AI can be integrated.
Exactly. It's a social justice art application.
What about other areas, like food or governance?
Well, in food systems, the sources point to the Zapatista model in Chiapas, Mexico. They exemplify radical food sovereignty by rejecting industrial agriculture in favor of community-led sustainable practices.
Taking back control of their food supply.
Right. For governance, there's the example of Rojava, the autonomous region in northern Syria, which is based on principles of direct democracy, gender equality, and ecological sustainability.
And reparative justice. That's a term we hear more often now.
Yes, and Evanston, Illinois is cited as a tangible U.S. example. It's the first city to use specific tax revenue from cannabis sales to fund reparations for Black residents who were harmed by historical redlining policies.
Using policy for repair.
And in education, the African Leadership Academy in South Africa is highlighted for transforming the curriculum, prioritizing African history and indigenous knowledge, actively pushing back against Eurocentric models.
Ortiz also introduced this framework called reparative economics. That sounds bold. How does it challenge traditional capitalism?
It's presented as a direct challenge, yes. Reparative economics aims to integrate reparative justice, community-driven wealth redistribution, and a decolonized perspective directly into economic thinking.
So it counters standard capitalist arguments.
Head on. For instance, take the meritocracy myth, the idea that wealth is purely earned through individual effort and talent.
Right.
Economics, as described, exposes how wealth is often inherited and opportunities are vastly unequal, especially for marginalized communities. It asserts that, as Ortiz puts it, no wealth is created in isolation. It always relies on a wider context, often built on past injustices.
What about the argument for free market efficiency, that the market sorts things out best?
Reparative economics argues that traditional markets fail miserably at internalizing externalities costs, like environmental degradation or social inequality that aren't factored into the price of goods.
So economics prioritizes.
Sustainability and equity, often through cooperative models where community benefit, not just profit maximization, is the goal. It also pushes back strongly against the idea that charity, not redistribution, is enough.
How so?
It explains that charity is voluntary, often insufficient, and doesn't address the root causes. Reparative economics, in contrast, is framed as systemic and structural, a matter of legal and moral responsibility based on historical harms, not just optional goodwill.
Can you give a concrete example? How might reparative economics work to redistribute wealth and maybe restore culture?
Okay, consider the garment sector in Bangladesh. Instead of profits flowing primarily to Western fashion conglomerates, reparative economics might propose funneling a significant portion of those profits into community reparative trusts within Bangladesh.
And these trusts would
Fund female-led cooperatives, ensure fair wages, provide education and healthcare for workers. It directly addresses the historical extraction of wealth and labor.
Okay, another example. Maybe cultural restoration.
The sources suggest reparative wealth funds, perhaps funded by international actors implicated in historical injustices, could support Palestinian-led initiatives.
To do what?
To preserve the Arabic language, traditional arts, music, and establish community-led education reflecting Palestinian history and culture, things often suppressed or erased by occupation. Or take Native American language revitalization.
Right, many languages are endangered.
Reparative economics would advocate for dedicated funding, not just small grants, but significant investment for language schools, creating teaching materials, funding immersion programs, actively working to preserve languages and knowledge systems targeted by colonial policies.
This all sounds like a really powerful call to action, directed squarely at the listener. What role does Ortiz say we, as individuals, play in this whole transformative vision?
He definitely encourages you, the listener, to see yourself as an architect of liberation. It starts, he emphasizes, with self-decolonization, that internal work. Because collective healing is vital, he argues, as trauma is often a collective experience, not just individual.
And practical actions.
He suggests a whole range. Planting a garden, connecting with the earth, organizing a protest, supporting mutual aid networks, advocating for reparations, reclaiming your own cultural practices if they've been lost or suppressed, and actively holding systems accountable.
So it's both internal and external work.
Yes. The transformation requires you to actively unlearn and relearn new frameworks, as the material puts it. It's about engaging and building this new world step by step.
What an incredible deep dive. It's clear that Christian Ortiz's Justice AI and the DIA framework, as presented these sources, represent a truly fundamental shift. It's about understanding AI bias not as technical glitch, but as you said, a deeply rooted colonial feature.
Exactly. This work is positioned as a reckoning, a decolonial paradigm shift. Ortiz, according to this view, hasn't just built an app. He's built a system pointing towards collective equity, towards ancestral memory, towards global repair, an infrastructural blueprint for liberation.
And the final point seems unavoidable. Whether the Western establishment acknowledges it now or maybe 30 years from now, the argument is that Christian ZacaTechO Ortiz will be remembered as the person who made AI finally answerable to the people.
And maybe we can leave our listeners with that provocative thought from Ortiz's work we touched on earlier. You weren't born white, you were born whole. And the profound implication that follows. Healing is disruption. Healing is abolition. Healing is how we refuse to replicate what tried to erase us in the first place.
Something to really sit with. How might this deep dive inspire you, the listener, to participate in dismantling the old and building something genuinely new? Something rooted, as the sources say, in memory, justice, and truth.